Hey everybody, Hoang here, and today we're going to do a retrospective tier list for the entire BT5 English format. In this video, my partner Zero has gone ahead and taken results from top 16 from multiple major Bandai tournaments, as well as other tournaments held by Bandai partners, and we have collected them all together to create a more analytical viewpoint on the entire BT5 meta. Why don't you take it away?
Hey, hey guys, Zero here. So just to give you guys a quick rundown on the data, what we've done is we have taken 11 major tournaments since the start of BTO5 around in August, and we've compiled the data for top 16 and top 8 to see generally what is doing well and like what type of decks is performing well in our meta. And because we keep saying that our English BTO5 meta is significantly different from Japan, so we wanted to have a analytical view of it and just to present the data to you. And just a few point before we start though, this data is not 100% complete because not every tournament posts their top 16 result. I try my best to find as much as I can, and this is going to be what you see today. And we're at the bottom of the video, also going to post all the tournament that we used to get this data. And another note, we're going to be missing some data from Oceania because they only have some top 4 data and generally just incomplete topping data. So if anyone in the community is able to get those data to us, it will be greatly appreciated, and we'll keep updating this list going forward. And this is going to be a project that our Discord is working on, where we're just going to be compiling as much competitive data as possible for any given meta, just so we can have a good look into see how decks are doing. And with that said,
All right.
let's move on to the graph.
Okay. So, as you can all see right here, we do have the top 16 and the top 8 data split into two. And do you want to touch on that a little bit, Zero?
Yeah. So the interesting thing with Digimon is that we have pricing for top 16. And not every and top 32 even, but not every card game does that. So the reason I have top 16 along with top 8 is because I feel like top 8 is a little bit too limited in viewing the scope of the meta. And as you can see on the data we have on screen, uh, just by looking at the difference between top 16 and top 8, you can see the deck's performance. The performance of some decks significantly drop if we just go up to top 8. That's just because of the way matchup works and the way certain decks play into each other. So as you get more into the top table, certain decks will performance will fall off. For to start off though, you want to take a look. Lore Knight, as everyone predicted, is probably undisputedly the best deck in the meta result wise, right? It has overwhelmingly the most amount of tops in top 8 or top 16. And then next on the list is Rookie Rush, which is performing equally as well, uh, relative to the rest of the pool. Now, here's the interesting one though. If we go to Security Control, if you look at top 16, Security Control is the best performing deck in the meta. But if you look at only top 8, it falls significantly lower than Green, with only getting about half of the amount of top 8 that Green has. So this just give you a basic view of how looking at a result can change between top 8 to top 16. And we're going to be using this data to then make a retroactive tier list for this meta.
So, I do want to touch on this topic a little bit, right? Because I feel like when a lot of people they look at the BT5 meta and the tier list and whatnot, they'll think, oh, Lord Knight is just untouchable, right? But, when we were going through this data, what was Lord Knight had an insane amount of players per tournament. Am I right with that?
The issue with trying to find this data is for Digimon, we don't require,
Mm-hmm.
as far as I know, none of the tournament organizers require a player to submit. Oh well, they don't keep track of what type of deck each player submit because each event is like 500 people. So very understandable that they don't want to compile that data. It's kind of a pain. But I think just by looking at trend, you can see that Lore Knight is overwhelmingly the favorite, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just you can enter any tournament, and generally majority of your matchup, I would say, would end up being Lore Knight. So I think based on that alone, you can make the safe assumption that Lore Knight is probably the heavy favorite in terms of tournament representation, and by a certain extent, probably Rookie Rush also. And it also doesn't hurt that both decks are relatively cheap to build compared to something like Security Control, which is quite a bit more
very expensive, right? Because of all the
right.
Omnimon Zort defeats. I think a really interesting point that we want to point out is, in my opinion, and you may or may not agree with me, Rookie Rush and Lord Nightmon is very much so a coin flip. Maybe it's like 52-48 at best, but in reality, it really does feel like a coin flip a lot of the times. Whereas Lord Nightmon versus Security Control, I feel like does swing into Lord Knight's favor. And so I feel like that's a very large reason as to why we see such a dip in Security Control going from top 16 to top 8, right? Because within that topping region, we see that you're more likely going to face those Lord Knight matchups. So Rookie Rush is over here coin flipping, right? It's going to go more or less 50-50, whereas Security Control, they're really going to struggle to break into that top 8 because now they have to get over all the Lord Knight players that broke into that top 16 as well. How do you feel about that statement?
I think this is a really interesting data point because, again, I do agree. I think Lord Knight and Rookie Rush are generally a coin flip, and I think it's a little bit in Lord Knight's favor because they do have the
just the the inherent removal and whatnot. That's kind of just built into yellow. Mm-hmm.
They do have a lot of the advantage that Rookie Rush also has, but they scale better, right? So
right.
Rookie Rush may take it from them some games, but generally in like an even game, Lord Knight is going to be favored as the game go on, right? If Rookie Rush just can't end the game early. Now, Security Control is a very interesting deck. So, as everyone knows, Security Control is fairly RNG heavy, even by Digimon standard, because a lot of your deck building matters, because whether you decide you want to have a more aggro style game by running more rookies, or you want a more heavy control aspect by having more cards that activate security, that could heavily affect how your deck perform in a longer tournament, where as you heal, the way you build your deck the RNG could skew one way or another, right? If you run too many early game pieces, you can potentially hurt your security checks into those matchup. And also, I think Security Control is a deck that prey on newer player, but more experienced player generally understand how to play around it a little bit more. So that's why I think once you get into the higher top table, you're gonna have the security player struggle a little bit more into the stronger player who probably know how to play into it better. So that's probably, I think that's a pretty good hypothesis on why Security Control sees such a drop off between top 8 and top 16, right?
So another interesting point that I do want to point out is the number one Security Control player in the English format, KVN, right? He has won top several events, in his record time. He plays a very interesting way of Security Control because, we're talking about how a lot of Security Control players, they play passive, they play reactive, they wait for the opponent to play into them. And so when you get into those top 8 tables, it becomes a lot more difficult because they know how to play around Security Control. Then, you've lost one of your advantages. He plays a much more mid-range aggressive style of Security Control, and he sees extremely favorable results with it. So I think, if we shifted to more of that style of Security Control, I think, what could happen this last month of BT5 before we swap into BT6, it could be extremely interesting, right?
Yeah, I agree. Now, to touch on another interesting deck is green. We both play green pretty extensively. Why do you think green? And I think we've discussed this before, but we both think green is pretty favorable into
100%.
Into Lord Knight especially, right? And it's pretty good. It's not terrible into Rookie Rush. Like as long as you see your Nihawk, I think you're pretty okay in the Rookie Rush matchup. So why do you think that the amount of result green has is significantly less than those two decks?
Okay. So for those of you that have watched my content for a while, I love green. I love green to pieces. It's arguably my favorite color in general, but green has good Lord Knight in my matchup because you have your Grand Kuwaga OTK combo, you have Bancho Stingmon access, Nidhogg blows Lord Knight out, Nidhogg blows out Rookie Rush. You have access to, 12 different blockers for the Rookie Rush matchup? Like, you have a lot of fantastic tools. Security Control can't touch you either because you get out of their threshold. So why does green not see as much representation? I think it's because green bricks. A lot of people, they'll say, oh, you Digivolve a bunch in green, so you just cycle. And the truth of the matter is that all of your actual draw power that comes from non-Digivolving, it's check top card if it's a green Digimon added to your hand. And that's not consistent enough, because if you find your Mimis or your Chaos Mons or whatever it may be, right, you end up bot decking it. And it's just...
Oh, you're 1 of HPD.
Yeah, you're 1 of HPD. Like, just, there's so many situations and scenarios where you just end up not getting the amount of plus you need, because you have to pay 3 to top deck 1 and hope it's a card you want. Like, that's so sus, you know? And so I feel like green ends up losing to itself more than it loses to anything else really in the field. And so I think that's why, interestingly enough, green has a pretty nice rate from going to top 16 to top 8, because a good green player can really take it far, because it does have a good matchup going into the meta. It just needs to not lose to itself. And that's why we're seeing cards like Takumi Aiba seeing play in green, because that extra cycle 1 you get per turn really does help a lot with that deck.
Well, it also is along the line of, once a player get into top 8, they need to win 1 more game.
Yeah.
When they get into top 16, they need to get 1 more game to win 1 more round to get into top 8. And so, I mean, realistically, the range between those is not difficult for green to just like play one of those games. Another point I want to touch on with green is that you mentioned, like the deck doesn't draw a lot. But I think another issue with the deck especially is that all of your level 6 are Digiburst Digimon.
True.
And the important point about that is because they're all Digiburst Digimon, if you ever break on a level 4 or a level 5 and you have to hard play a level 5, you're gonna struggle to do anything because your level 6 are essentially now vanilla.
Yeah, they're all useless.
Right.
Yeah.
I think over an 8 or 9 round tournament, which is a format, again, this is a format that exclusively to us, Japan doesn't play it. So you're looking at 24, 27 games. If green brick in
any of those games, your life becomes so much harder, right? And it's not asking for a lot for green to brick on you either. It's so easy for that to happen. And if it does happen, life gets hard. And so you just have to hope your deck works with you that day. Green is not a consistent color, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, the most interesting thing, and the main reason I think that we decided to do this retrospective tier list, is the color that nobody expected to perform as well.
Oh my god, yes.
Yeah, we had this at tier 3.
I definitely did not give this deck credit. When we tested this originally in the Japanese debut format, this deck was absolutely dog water. Okay, it just was not good whatsoever. And I think there's actually a couple reasons as to why this deck is doing very well now. But I'll let you do the analysis, the data first, real quick.
Right. So, interesting thing is, I think we can probably make a safe assumption that across all of these 11 tournaments, Black probably has one of the lower representation among all the color. That would be a fair analysis, right?
Yeah.
I think most people just didn't play Black until very recently when it started having more result and people started believing it more. But if you go back maybe a month and a half, you're probably gonna find like very little amount of people playing Black in these major tournaments.
Right.
So the fact that it is 5th place in top 16 result,
well, tied with Lilith, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I mean, it's among top 5. Yeah. So I mean, it's quite there in terms of like, hey, this is not a bad color. Like, this is performing pretty well.
So I think some of the interesting points that we have to acknowledge going into this analysis is that, one, the original Japanese format didn't have Sonorizomon promo, which we have seen come up a lot in the most recent Blacklist, especially Black Toolbox, right? Because Metal Garurumon plus Gogma plus Kapurimon is 13k, which means your Sonorizomon then suddenly becomes online. We also see in the Turbo defeat list with Gogma plus Hyandro, that's also 13k. So again, you're getting that +1 security attack relatively easily. So I think that's really, really good. And not only that, but security control is a huge factor in the North American scene, which did not exist in the Japanese format. And security control didn't become a thing in Japanese format until we got the Gallantmon starter deck with the Atomic Blaster and whatnot. And, after conversing with players such as Maplefan, who has told me his record against security control is absolutely stellar due to Metal Garurumon burning 1 security, I think it's also a huge factor as to why Black is doing so well. You have tools like Craniumon, you have tools like Black Metal Garurumon, and you can also force yourself into thresholds where suddenly cards like Transcendent Sword can't touch you either. Just overall, really, really excited to see this color come into the forefront of the North American play, English scene, really.
Yeah, when we did the interview, I was the player playing against the deck in the video that we did, and one thing I noticed was that I found myself in very difficult position as the Lord Knight player, because sometimes, and I was playing the standard Lord Knight / Angemon list, but I would find myself being 1k off removing whatever you had on board, and I'm just like, hey, maybe he built around this threshold, and it just occurred to me like, that's pretty cool, and this probably the list was probably preying on Lord Knight because Lord Knight was it's a good deck, but it was built with certain power line assumption in mind in terms of removal, right? Like 4+8 to remove any 12k. Well, blast happened to be 13, so it's a little bit more annoying for you to remove blast. Like, you can't just be like move Wargrout out, burst, and evolve slash up to memory and remove the blast. Like that kind of situation came up a lot, and so that was very interesting. So,
well, I think a really cool point to add is we acknowledge Black had a relatively low representation rate. So I think the few players that did decide to play Black, whether it was Black Toolbox or a Defeat Turbo, I think because of the abundance of Lord Nightmons in top 16 especially, we see that Black, if they made it to top 16, they had a really good shot, looking at the data, to make it into the top 8. And that's because the 3 most popular decks in top 16, you had a favorable matchup into all 3 of them. So I think that's really cool, right? Because like you're saying before, Lord Nightmon struggles with certain DP thresholds to break through, like Blastmon or Gogmamon thresholds. Rookie Rush loses the Ultimate Flare, or a Mechanoriumon that can force them to have that out, whether it's a Spiral or a Flower Cannon or Needle Spray. And then security control, again, you dodge certain thresholds, you have the burn security, Craniumon, etc., right?
Yeah, hard play Craniumon and security control is suffering, right?
I think if purple and green had a higher representation, especially in top 16, I don't think Black would have done as well. I think Black as a color is extremely volatile to the meta surrounding it. As long as Lord Knight, Rookie Rush, and Security Control are the most popular decks, Black will continue to see success in the BT5 format. But green and purple, after talking with Maplefan, he stated before that he has a lot of difficulties into those matchups, especially purple, because if you don't have the Crania, then suddenly all of your stuff's susceptible. They don't care about your DP thresholds. Everything is going to die to Hell's Gate, right? So... Right, if we had saw more representation from that, Black probably would not have done as well. But because we didn't see those decks, and because we saw the decks that Black did feast upon, well, look at it. The data speaks for itself, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. And to go back to the data, you look at the next 3 decks in line. You have Imperial, you have Diaboromon, and then you have Lilith. I think these decks are kind of similar in the sense that they just kind of play their game plan, right?
Right.
And if they roll well enough, they generally just win into most matchup, I would safely say. So just looking at this, it kind of makes sense. And I believe we had them on bottom of tier 1, high tier 2.
Yeah.
So they're performing to about expectation. Kind of the same with Shoutmon. And as mentioned, certain decks here are going to have a little bit lower rep because, again, we don't have the full complete data, and we would love to have the complete data. So, if you guys can provide it to us, that would be, like, come and join our Discord.
Yeah,
and, throw data at us, we'll compile it for you.
Yeah, the intention, right, is that we can create a community-driven database full of the competitive tops because, we just want everyone to grow. We want everyone to get better, right? So compiling all that data for members of the community to use as a resource, I think it's just a good idea. I think this by itself, right? This was made all by Zero, and it's absolutely fantastic. So imagine what we can do with the rest of the community. And obviously we had community members help out as well.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you, Hayes, for providing me a lot of this data. Yep. And let's go to the next slide. I want to discuss
Okay.
this.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Top the
here's
winners.
a yeah here's a very interesting thing to look at, right?
Hmm.
We've previously discussed how low representation black is, but if you look right here, these are winners from the 11 tournaments.
Yeah.
And of course, Lua Knight has the most win because again, it has the most rep.
Yeah,
Makes
it's a
sense,
huge representation.
right? Here's an interesting thing: Security Control has not won a single
Hmm.
event that I'm aware of. Uh, Black has won 3 events, and Green has won 2 events, I believe. Yeah. So just by looking at this, you want to add anything? Any point? Any insight you want to give on this?
So, like we were talking about before with the whole security control conundrum, is that when you get to the top tables, it becomes a lot harder for you to see success because everyone knows how to play security control at that level of gameplay. And that's probably why we don't see security control winning any of the events. But we look at Lord Nightmon. Lord Nightmon is overall extremely powerful deck, huge in play rate. I think more often than not, I think it was a Lord Nightmon mirror in finals for a lot of those games. So, one way or another, Lord Nightmon was going to win. But Black, from what I recall talking with some people, it saw Lord Nightmon in the finals a lot, and it has a favorable matchup into that, the Lord Nightmon. Speaking,
You have no idea how funny it was going through the tournament result and
yeah,
looking at top 16, and it's like, oh, it's 7 Lord Nightmon, 5 Rookie Rush
yeah.
in top 16. And then you just look at some of those top 8 chart coming out of Europe. It's like 4 Lord Knight, 3 Rookie Rush.
Hmm.
It's so interesting. Like it's really funny.
No, yeah, Digimon in general is extremely diverse meta for the most part. We've seen a lot of crazy stuff top. Like I know Hexablau did win in Oceania, but again, the data wasn't there, so we can't put it in. But there's like a lot of wild stuff just in general. Green doing well, it doesn't surprise me because again, it has very good matchup into a lot of the meta. It just has to not brick until you win the whole the whole dang thing, right?
Yeah.
Rookie. Oh, what's up?
People who get to the finals and just didn't break in the final games is probably going to end up doing pretty
Yeah.
well because the deck itself is strong.
I know Max Tapera, he ended up winning Evo Cup not too long ago playing Rufflesia Nidhogg. And he played 4 Nidhogg. Nidhogg wins you a lot of these matchups. You run 4 if you want to see it, right? Like, that just makes sense.
Yep.
But yeah, so Black does really well into the overall meta. Green does well into the overall meta. Rookie Rush, again, you're coin flipping a little bit. You are a tad bit coin flippy. So I think to get a win on Rookie Rush in this format, I think you just have to accept the fact that you do need to win the coin flip a tad. And I think Dio Boromon's the most interesting one here, just because of the fact that I'm going to do my own game plan. I'm not going to care too much about what you want to do. I'm going to make my tokens. You do you. If you can take care of my tokens, that's cool. Congratulations. But I think that's actually really interesting. Personally, I think that's probably the weirdest one. Definitely the weirdest one.
Yeah, but it's also one event. So
It is one. It is just one.
yeah, if it started doing well in more event, we can take a deeper look into it. But this again is a card game. There's
Yeah.
ENG
Oh
involved,
yeah, for sure.
sometime rogue deck will win.
Yeah.
So
We actually see this a lot of the times, right? Is that like because it is a card game, there's a lot of RNG just inherently built into it, like you said. And so when we see decks that do win an event here and there, one win I don't think is enough to solidify it as tier 1 immediately. I think it does, like you said again, has to consistently see results. And when I saw Black win the first event to defeat Turbo, I was very what was the word? Suspicious. Skeptical, yeah. I was very skeptical about it. I was like, oh, okay, maybe it won because of a fluke. But then it kept seeing results. I was like, okay, I can no longer call it a fluke. I now have to acknowledge the fact that Black is doing very well in the meta, and I have to figure out why it's doing so.
I don't think you just casually fluke win
Nah.
the 500-person event.
Nah.
I think that's very unlikely, especially in such a short time frame. I think the first win kind of brought on more people to try Black, and then they realized, hey, this color is actually pretty good into the meta.
So with this logic, do you think Dio Boromon will see any more results in the last month of BT5? Just
I think it's unlikely.
Mhm.
I think it's very unlikely, just the nature of the deck. And again, like maybe someone has like a really good run,
Yeah.
like just get really hot that day, and just see all their pieces
Mhm.
and whatever, and they can run it. But in my opinion, it seemed very unlikely for Diablo to win again.
Mhm.
It seemed unlikely to see another Diablo in top eight, to be honest, because
Yeah.
it Diablo is not a top contender in top eight. It has very little. It's on par with most of the other tier two decks in terms of the amount of top eights and top 16 it has.
For me, in my experience, Lord Nightmon versus Diaboromon feels extremely easy for the Lord Nightmon player. Maybe the person who topped the Diaboromon feels differently about it, but speaking as somebody who's put a fair amount of time in the Lord Nightmon, being able to pop the tokens relatively easily because you have access to cards like Chaosmon and such like that, unless they're on Armageddonmon, in which case War Greymon puts in so much work. I love that card. Uh, but nonetheless, I think Lord Nightmon will inevitably gatekeep Diaboromon from getting more wins in the last month of BT5.
Yeah, it's possible. Again,
Mm-hmm.
I would put Diablo on the same tier as Imperial.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
speaking of tier, I think it's time we do the
It
tier
is
list.
time. You've all been waiting for it. But da da. Boo! New tier list. Okay, so you may notice the tier list is a lot shorter than the initial BT5 tier list, and that is because a lot of the decks that we predicted to see results in the meta didn't end up doing anything in the meta, or just that we felt it was redundant and then it ended up getting paired together, like Rafflesia, for example. We'll touch on that in a bit, but starting us off, tier 1, Lord Nightmon obviously is the definitive best deck in the format, right? We're not only just looking at it from our own playtesting experience, from just and also data analysis as well, but just overall, it is an insane deck, right? Like, I don't think anyone's going to argue that this is not the best deck in the format.
Yeah, I think it has some slightly unfavorable matchup, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't think Lord Knight has any matchup in the meta that I would call heavily unfavored,
No,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I think every matchup in the format, you can still like get a win out of it.
Yeah.
Black or green may be unfavorable, but it's not unwinnable. You have several ways to force yourself into that win, whether it's Anja Woolmon to force out another body, or maybe it's War Greymon to beat the green matchup. Etc. There's just a ton of different ways Lord Nightmon can tech into those specific matchups because Lord Nightmon itself is super versatile, right? We've seen Lord Nightmon Slash, Lord Nightmon War Greymon, Lord Nightmon Sakuyamon, Lord Nightmon Mastemon, and that's just crazy.
Yeah, it just the deck just lends itself to a
Yeah.
lot of variation, and on top of that, initially we predicted that one of the stop to Lord Nightmare was going to be security control, but
Mm-hmm.
turns out not having Atomic Blaster
Yeah,
is
it was
such a
huge.
huge.
It was super
Yeah,
huge.
yeah, yeah. If you look at Japan, the deck started to fall off because security control had Atomic Blaster,
Mm-hmm.
but in the English meta we still don't have Atomic Blaster, so that card ended up just being so significant for the matchup to be in security control favor
Yep.
that as someone who's played into that matchup a bunch of time, I think a competent Lord Knight pilot can certainly put themselves into a very favorable position to win, as long as they don't hit like the worst security
Like
ever,
just Gaia
right?
Force, right? Or Ultimate
Yeah,
Flares.
yeah. I mean, if you hit three Gaia Force, what can you do?
Yeah, it happens. Um, and so moving on to tier 1, Rookie Rush, definitely tier 1. I don't think anyone's going to argue with it. It's very few bad matchups because it is Rookie Rush, so it's inherently just a very linear game plan. It wants to do one thing. It does that one thing very well. It just wants to go face. So if you inevitably run into matchups like Black, where you have Ultimate Flare or just an abundance of blockers, yeah, it can be difficult. But that's why we have cards like Spiral Masquerade. And that's why Hexablow, weirdly enough, doesn't stomp this matchup because Spiral Masquerade as a card exists. You can just Hexblow is 11k, right? Which same as 12k in this situation. So 4 Digimon, and you end up killing Hexablow because Hexablow as a deck doesn't end up removing anything. But
Yep.
I
The
digress.
issue with the issue with Hexblow into this matchup is you still leave the Digimon on board.
Hmm.
So the moment they can get rid of your Hexblow, they'll just go in.
Yeah, it's just it just
Right.
it
So
just suddenly
yeah.
becomes hard.
Unlike a Nidhogg, where a
It's
Nidhogg
just a board
actually,
wipe. Yeah.
yeah,
So overall, I think Rookie Rush is the second best deck in the format. A it coin flips with the best deck in the format, which automatically puts you in a very interesting situation, right? It
yep,
has good matchups overall. It's very consistent. A lot of people they say, "Oh, I'm bricking a lot. I can't seem to find my pieces." if you can't play green, go play Rookie Rush. You're like very rarely ever gonna break. Maybe like 1 out of 10 games you'll break, but
Yeah, it's very interesting to see the most consistent deck and one of the most bricky deck next to each other on the tier list.
right. So green, I just off the data and off how we feel personally, green ceiling is so high. I don't think anyone's gonna argue with me. Fast evolution, powerful level 6s. You're just so strong, but you lose to yourself more often than not, and it's so annoying and frustrating when it does happen like that. And that's what I feel like keeps green from being more of a monster than it actually is in the BT5 format, is that it just loses to itself.
Yep.
So
I agree.
I think given the tools that green has, as well as just how it's performed throughout the course of this format, I think saying it's the third best deck in this format, I think it's pretty reasonable, right? You can make an argument that Security Control has more top 16 results, but the conversion into top 8 was not super hot for Security Control, whereas it was pretty dang hot for green.
And green has won 2 events.
Yeah. Okay, so going into that fourth, though, we do want to touch on Security Control. Security Control is still a deck that we have to consider overall in the meta. It is still a menace to be reckoned with. If you don't know this matchup, it can just slam you out of the tournament entirely. It does, like you said before, it does prey on a lot of more inexperienced players. They don't know to play around specific security thresholds or how to dodge certain security options. And I think that's a really interesting point. So I think overall, I think saying Security Control is tier 2 would be, it's not correct. I definitely think it's within tier 1, but I personally could be persuaded to put it even lower on the tier list, just because as more people become accustomed to having to deal with Security Control, it loses a lot of its potency.
That's a really good point that you're making. I think us having the long delay for BT05 is going to end up hurting Security Control more.
Yeah.
Because one of the benefit of Security Control is for the first part of a meta, how a standard Security Control list can be a little bit variable in what option they play and what cards they play, making it a little bit more difficult for you as the opponent to guess what type of card that you're generally playing into. But as deck lists become more soft and more standardized, and generally like 90% of the time what kind of option you're running into, the deck become significantly easier to play into and play around. So that's why this deck benefit from whenever a meta reset and new cards are introduced, right?
Yeah.
So us having a 1 month delay into a longer meta may end up just hurting Security Control in the next several major tournament that's going to happen. I'll be interested to see if that does indeed happen.
Yeah, and so moving on from Security Control, we do see Black. We have Black Toolbox, where it was the Melga and Blastmon, and then we also have Defeat Turbo, represented by the High Andromon icon. I was talking about this with Zero just a little bit before this video, and we felt like the two decks kind of go hand in hand. Black Toolbox saw about half of it, and then Defeat saw the other half. So it's fair to say that they're both within the same ballpark of one another. They both utilize the Son of Rizomon promo, the hidden specific DP thresholds, and the burning one security or popping a body off the Melga. But ultimately, they come down to the difference between I want to sit on my 6 and use my toolbox flexibility versus I'm going to go to 7 and you can't stop me, right?
Yeah, and both deck has saw a 1. Both deck has 1 event, so I think it's fair to put them together.
Yeah, it makes sense. Ultimately, the major core of both decks are relatively the same thing. It's just the top end is different. That's all. But I think Black, as more people understand what is happening, because we were playing the other day, and people still didn't know what Son of Rizomon did. They got the piercing and the security attack plus mixed up, or they didn't realize it only worked on Black Digimon. And I think as more people start to learn what Black cards do, because again, it was a very unpopular color prior to this, so nobody was playing the color. As more people discover what the color can actually do, I feel like a lot more people are going to start playing around certain lines of play. We'll start to see more counters like purple or green even.
Black. I forgot Black Metal Gear Ruben has reboot.
Yeah, so that's just another point to say that because of the extended month of BT5, this tier 1 can very easily shift in favor of other decks rising up and these tier 1s falling out. I think the most susceptible to this is black and security control, because as more people figure out what's happening, they lose a lot in their potency.
That's a very fair assessment, I would say.
And then we have Lilith Loop. Lilith Loop is weird. It's really weird.
Yeah, for me personally, I kind of don't. Doesn't matter to me if this is tier 1 or tier 2.
Yeah.
I think if we make a tier 1.5, we probably just throw in Lilith, Imperial, and maybe even Diaboromon in that area, because they're, again, as mentioned previously, they're decks that just kind of like play their game plan and kind of just like hope your opponent doesn't have like an out to your game plan or whatever, right? And then you try to achieve it in time. A lot of times they're playing against themselves, like in a lot of ways that Green does. Lilith, like if you don't see your loop option, you lose the game. Imperial, if you don't see Pyodramon, I would say you struggle a lot more. Like it's just the kind of play style.
So I do want to touch back into the data. Is that Lilith Loop was tied for the 5th most representation in top 16, and then it did peter out in top 8 a little bit, where it went to 3, but that's not too far off from security control in black. So it does have.
It just doesn't have result. The thing is, it doesn't have result it doesn't have result in terms of winning.
Yeah.
Where black was able to convert its top 8 and top 16 into 3 wins.
Yeah.
Where Lilith Loop has none.
I think that's like one of the harder parts of the Lilith Loop, right? It's like black isn't super flimsy of a game plan, right? It's very much so like a very rock solid game plan all around, and knows what it wants to do. Whereas Lilith Loop, winning a whole tournament is asking for everything to go right in your favor. I think this deck has a bad matchup in a Lord Nightmon. I know a lot of people will say otherwise. They'll say, "Oh, I get my loop off on turn 4," and I think you're just lucky.
I mean, can you get your loop off on turn 4?
Like you're playing 24, 27 games potentially.
Well, okay, if you 2-0 every single round, you're playing minimum, 16 to 18 games. But if you break in a single of those games, then you end up having to play another game.
Yeah.
Which is more potential for you to break in. So, I mean, I think most people who play Lilith Loop have a very realistic view of the deck. Anyone who has touched this deck probably has like a pretty realistic view of how it performed. I don't think it's fair to say like most people don't expect to take this deck into play like 20 games and never break. Like it's never gonna happen.
You just I feel like you just bank on your ceiling is astronomically high, right? We can very much so argue Lilith Loop has the highest ceiling in all of BT5 format because of how insane the combo is, and 2, you just need to consistently see the combo 2 out of 3 of the games. And I feel like Digimon as a game, because of how much you cycle, we do have a little bit more breathing room than other card games when it comes to finding our combo pieces, right? I don't know about you, but if I tech a 1-of, I'm probably going to see the 1-of at least 1 out of the 3 games in that best of 3.
Yep, that's a very fair assessment. And I think that's the reason why decks like Lilith Loop is playable in the first place. But they're still far from consistent.
No, by far, nowhere near the same consistency as, say, like Lord Nightmon. No.
Right.
Okay, so tier 2, Imperial Ultramon. I feel Imperial Ultramon is just the king of tier 2. This deck, it can high roll its way very far. As we've seen in top 16, it got 5 top 16 results and then petered out at 2 in top 8. And unless your name is Dan Vang, who is an actual anime main protagonist, most people don't see the same success and results with Imperial Ultramon. Imperial Ultramon it's a deck that can take you from 3 to death very easily, because you Pyodra, Imperial Omni, and that's a super that's not even asking too much, right? You're asking for a 5, a 6, and a 7. Like that's what a lot of decks already ask for to begin with.
Yep, and you also have like even if you don't have like the Omnimon, you also have like Hammer Spark into a Lobomon or something like that too.
We have Lobomon, right? So even if you're at 4, Pyodra, Imperial, Lobo Omni, right? And that also works super well. And then we've also seen the Nidhogg tech, which a lot of people when it first initially appeared, they didn't expect it at all, and then they got board wiped to it. So I feel like that also led it itself a tad bit to its performance. But as people become more accustomed to that Nidhogg tech, they'll play more around it, and so it'll lose a bit of its potency. But nonetheless, I think Imperial Dramon alongside Lilith Loop are the two biggest high roll decks in the format, and if it high rolls, you're probably winning the game, like just flat out. Not much your opponent can do.
Right.
All right, Diaboromon. Again, Diaboromon did get its one win, so it shows that it is a presence that we cannot underestimate, and it does have a few top 16 results. It has 5 actually, and it was tied with Lilith Loop for top 8. This deck is actually pretty cool. If you don't have the tools to remove the amount of tokens that come out of its body, you definitely can get overwhelmed, and this deck only gets stronger going forward into the BT6 format. But for me, it's hard to put this in tier 1 just because of how poor of a Lord Nightmon matchup I personally feel it has. So I'm pretty content with keeping it within the tier 2 range.
Doesn't it kind of also struggle into Spiral Masquerade against Rookie Rush just because Spiral
Very
just
true.
hit really good? Yep.
Yeah.
Spiral just happened to hit very good number at removing your
You
rookies.
hope you see your ultimate flare. That's your out, really, right?
Yeah.
You're an inherently slow deck. All of your tokens get popped by a single instance of Spiral. Yeah, it's just kind of rough, huh?
And also lose it to Nidhogg too. That's another thing to consider.
Nidhogg's also a very big one. All right, so Grand Kuwagamon OTK. Green OTK, if I remember correctly, was doing pretty well in English format tournaments, and it also had a lot of success in Hong Kong in the original JP format, where it was beating Lord Nightmon because Lord Nightmon wasn't playing a lot of healing at the time because it was just play strictly for tempo, board expansion, DP reduction. It didn't have a lot of room for healing in the initial build. So Green OTK took advantage of that because Lord Nightmon cannot restand like War Greymon could in the previous format. So Nidhogg was just an absolute blowout card in that matchup. So I think Green OTK, for the most part, is still a very powerful deck, but we saw that Lord Nightmon players ended up teching more healing than the initial OCG format. So as a result, Green OTK lost a little bit of its potency, but it can still steal games very well. We just see its more evolved version in the toolbox variant, which I forgot to touch on. The reason Rafflesia herself isn't in the tier list is because Rafflesia was more often than not seen as a side mega to accompany the Green Toolbox or to accompany Green OTK. It was not seen as its own deck outside of Max Tepera's, which you can argue if it was actually a Rafflesia deck because it was 4/4 with Nidhogg, but take that as you will.
Same with War Greymon yellow, right? Like War Greymon doesn't see play by itself. It's usually
it's the side mega.
It's a side mega tech in Lure Knight.
Yeah. Okay.
And same with Chaos Gallon. I've done for most of the result. I don't believe Chaos Gallon is generally ever the main card in the deck, where it's more so a support card for Tactimon along with like Pluto and such.
So I know you've played a very fair share of Chaos Gallantmon. And I have played a very fair share of Lord Nightmon into Chaos Gallantmon. And I will say, that matchup is so free. Like, so incredibly free. I think Chaos Gallantmon, like pure Chaos Gallantmon, gets farmed by Lord Nightmon.
Yeah, I think the matchup is absolutely abysmal.
I think it's awful. I think it's literally abysmal for Chaos Gallantmon.
Yeah, the issue is, as the Chaos Gallant, you need to see so many specific pieces, right? You need to see the Gilmon to burst with your War Growl to evolve into Chaos Gallant, just so you can pop a level 5 without passing turn and get a rookie back. That's not like you're seeing. You need to see like very specific pieces to do what is like a decent play. It's not even like a huge payoff, right? So and once your stack get removed, you just lose so much tempo to Lord Knight, and it's a decent deck, but I think it's also very susceptible to getting farmed by Rookie Rush. Sometime.
Oh yeah.
I know we talk about hey, you know how the Tacti is like really strong into rookies and stuff like that, but Rookie Rush can just evolve into level 4, or they'll just run the rookie in before you can get the Tacti off because they'll just play stall, right? And then if you move the Tacti out and try to remove their board, they can spiral you back. and then force you to build up a stack again. So it you would think it would be really strong into that matchup, but like realistically, it struggled into Rookie Rush quite a bit. So it's a solid deck. I just don't think it does favorably into most of the tier 1 decks.
So I think we look at Purple Toolbox, who, going off the results, it had 3 top 16s, no top 8s, unfortunately. But Purple Toolbox is very interesting because it does cover a lot of the weaknesses that the other variants of Purple had. You know, Chaos Gallantmon, if they hit in Raising and they went to 6, you couldn't touch it anymore because Chaos Gallantmon only hits 5 and below. And then Plutomon's like, oh, you need a Hell's Gate? Here you go, buddy. And then you have like, oh, they went for Rookie Rush? Okay, Tactimon, you know, pull out the katana and just eat the rookies. And then, like, every once in a while, if you have to pop a 5, you can go into Chaos Gallantmon, I guess. But whatever.
Yeah.
I know Dingo, who piloted top 16 with the Plutomon toolbox list, he didn't even play Chaos Gallantmon. He played Anubismon, right?
Yeah.
So, Purple Toolbox is... I think it's pretty solid, but you do need to see your very specific out to the correct opponent, and I feel like that's not very consistent. And even if you do see your specific outs, it's still not like super hot.
Yeah, and keep in mind, we don't think there's a huge gap between tier 1 and
No, tier 2 can definitely win. Tier 2 can definitely top 8, top 16, arguably win events again, because we do see Diaboromon win events. We've seen Shout, Hexablow, etc. Tier 2 is super viable, but
Yep.
there is, we do, as analysts, we do have to separate that to some degree.
Yep, and speaking of Shout and Hexblow, both of those have, again, one event in Oceania, and that's why they're on tier 2 right now.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, data-wise,
yeah, they just
they're
didn't,
not seeing...
they didn't perform very well.
Yeah, then they're not seeing a huge amount of repetition in top 16 across,
no, like
11 it was 11 major tournament,
Mm-hmm.
over 4,000 players that we look at for data, and it just didn't... I mean, they just don't have that much result. Like, Shaman has 4, which is neat, but if you convert that to top 8, it's a little bit less. Shaman is arguably much better off than Hexblow, I would say. I think it has.
I think so. Yeah.
I think it has a more solid game plan into the meta, and it can definitely win. It just struggle into like the Lord Knight matchup, and just matchup that can easily remove a big stack.
So I think we're actually seeing an adaptation within Shoutmon in order to fight off Lord Knightmon in the form of the Mega Digimon Fusion build, where they fuse into Omnimon, and Omnimon's restand ability, if for those of you that don't know, it's not once per turn. So because you stack all of your 6s underneath Shoutmon, you just keep swinging, and that's pretty cool.
Yep.
But yeah, overall, Shout and Hexblow, they did see some wins. They did see, like Hexblow got like 1 top, really, maybe 2 that we didn't find. But overall, they just didn't perform to the level that we would expect of a tier 1 deck.
If we have more complete data, maybe these will have a few more tops, but I don't think they'll be significant enough to change our thoughts and placement on these. And to round off the list, we have Ancient Garuru, and this is specifically Yellow Maste without Lord Knight, that both got a top 16. This Yellow Maste list is from Haze specifically, and they both got a top 16, so we did include them on the list. They're not, I don't think they're bad decks by any means, but I think they are a little bit more lacking than the other decks that we've talked about so far.
It's kind of like the same logic, where there's not enough results to indicate that they're a huge part of the meta, but they did get a result or as a result or two, so we do have to give it some credit. So again, it's probably better than whatever tier 3 has, but it's very hard to put it like within the upper range of tier 2, competing with decks like Imperial or Diaboromon.
Yeah, like you have Greymon in tier 3 that could probably be tier 2 because it has like one.
It has like the one top, yeah.
Yeah, well, almost nothing else on this list made any sort of impact.
I think D Brigade got 4th at an event recently, but it wasn't like the data for top 16 wasn't there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so again, if your deck didn't make tier 2, it's not because we hate your deck. It's probably because
the data is just not there.
Yeah, we don't have the data for it. Even some of the tournament we used didn't have full complete top 16. No. We had to make do with top 8. So, but for the most part, of the 11 tournament, we're able to get probably 85% of the actual top results, top 16 results. So it's a pretty accurate indication of the meta, I would say.
So, touching on tier 3, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it is tier 3, and this can really be whatever. And we're almost at an hour in this video, by the way. But Greymon did get one top. I think Greymon Tribal is actually low-key sleeper. I think it can actually do quite a bit in the meta, but the data there isn't... It doesn't have the data to support it. And I feel like it has to see against very specific pieces, kind of similar to Purple Toolbox, where it needs certain things to go its way. You see the correct response to every situation. So if we had more data, I feel like this deck could end up being within mid-tier 2, realistically. But the data is just not there. So I feel like very top of tier 3, arguably bottom tier 2. I think that's pretty fair. This can be like right here. Who cares?
Yeah, the rest of tier 3 is how many ways can we find to say the data is not there?
Yeah. Don Devimon, I don't think it did very much. Hercules Kabuterimon didn't do very much. Again, D Brigade, it did see that one result, I think.
I don't believe Megazoo is even a deck that people
Omnizoo topped, but it's like once. Blue-green Ricky Rush is basically non-existent, and I think OTK Purple got one result as well, maybe. But yeah, tier 3 is like very much so the territory of like there's not enough data or playtesting or whatever to support us pushing it up.
Yep, and I think this is again, this is looking back using data we have. I think our initial tier list for the meta is not too off.
No, I don't think it was really off.
The only thing we were really off on was black.
It was definitely black.
Yep. And so, this was our attempt to give you a look into the meta now that has developed quite a bit. And we hope to continue to do this going forward. So if you are someone with access to data from Europe or data from Oceania, please join our Discord and throw the, topping data at us, and we'll be very happy to compile this.
If you want, our Discord link is in the description down below, Hoang Zero Discord. So hop in, guys. It's pretty cool there. Pretty cool there.
Yep. And I think that's all we have for you today.
Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you for everyone that made it to the end of this video. I know this was a very long video, and there was a lot of analysis behind it, which I'm sure most of you guys come here for the deck profiles, but I enjoy this kind of content. I'm super grateful for my partner Zero here for going out of his way and taking time to make all this analysis and graphs and whatnot. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. But overall, I hope this gives you guys a better look at what ended up happening in the BT5 format. We still have an entire month of this format if you live in USA or Canada. I think every other region got BT6 already. So stay strong. Go win your national invites with this newly found tier list. Have fun, guys. All right. Bye-bye.